Hello, lovely people. I'm Debs. Welcome back to my channel, Rainy Read Stuff. I'm here in the book shack and it's Sunday, so I'm going to do my weekly reading wrap up. I have had a monumental reading week this week. It's been really cold here this week and miserable, like living in a cloud, not raining all the time, but just grey and miserable. And everybody's been a bit coldy, so I don't think I've really left the house. I've been out a couple of times, but not much. What I have been doing is reading. Lots and lots. So, where shall we start? Let's start with a couple of really, really short books. I don't know if everybody knows the hourly history books, but every Friday they send you through a list of free ebooks. And before the Read What You Own challenge, obviously, I was just downloading them, all the free ones. So I've got a great load of different things. They literally take an hour to read. They're, for 50, 60 pages. I found two that were suitable for Filmtastic February, which is organised by Annie at Obscure Book Adventures. So I read, this is a life from beginning to end, both of these in an hour. So not very extensive. I read one on Marlon Brando, which was quite interesting. And another one on Audie Murphy, which was more interesting. Man, that guy was decorated. He was very short as well. 5'5", I think it said he was, and he was just the most decorated war hero. He appeared to have no fear. They were quite interesting. They're very short, and I use these. Most of the ones I've got are historathon based. And I use them to sample whether or not I want to know any more about a subject. So it's like a little taster, and a amuse-bouche, if you will. And then I decide whether or not I want to read any more on the subject, and often I do. Now, it was the beginning of the month, so a new book for the I'm with the Band book club on Fable that is organised by MJ, and this month's choice was There by Tommy Orange. What an incredible book. It's in several parts. Each chapter deals with a member of Native American, what's the word, community. And it's all building up to a big powwow that's being organised by some of the community leaders. It's really, really raw. It doesn't pull any punches. These characters that you're introduced to are so well drawn, and they seem quite, each chapter seems quite different, a bit like a short story to begin with, but as you carry on in the book, it all draws together at this big community event, and it is just heart-wrenching and explosive and brilliant, and I loved it. I have another Tommy Orange book. I can't remember what it's called. Might be the next one. Maybe it's Wandering Stars. Is that's what it's called? But what a read this was. Just an incredible book. I think everybody should read it. Now, sticking with the banned books, sometimes you can read them by accident. I found this last year when I was going through, sort of 2/3 of the way through the year, I was going through the number of books I'd read, and I'd topped the 24 for 24 last year because some of the ones I'd read I didn't realise were banned books, and the same can be said with this. I read The Sign of the Four for Homes is Where the Heart Is, that is organised by Jim at Mystery and Mayhem, and I read it in this Delphi Classics Complete Arthur Conan Doyle, mainly because the book that I stole, the beautiful book that I stole from my father's library, doesn't have it in there. So I read The Sign of the Four. It's I love Sherlock Holmes stories. There are places where it's a book of its time that I take offence at occasionally, but generally I think they're brilliant. They're a really good read. They're an easy read. The longer novels are not long. In fact, what was this one? It was only 140 pages long. In this one, a young woman comes to see Sherlock Holmes, and she has mislaid her father. For many years, her father has been mislaid. He was on his way back from India, and he disappeared without trace. And she tried to find him and failed. Years have gone by, and then all of a sudden, she starts receiving once a year a large pearl from she knows not whom. And then she gets a letter saying that should she meet someone at a specific location at a specific time, it would be to her advantage, and she's welcome to bring two friends. So she heads along to see Sherlock Holmes and Watson and takes them along with her. And this is the novel in which Watson finds a wife, but also it's a challenged book. This was recently, well, I say recently, I mean this century, it was challenged in high schools in, I can't remember which state now. I want to say Idaho, but I might just be making that up. On the basis, it was this and Study in Scarlet, both challenged on the basis that it didn't represent Muslims in a good light. Now, whatever you think about that, there was no mention in the challenges of Mr. Holmes's frequent and habitual cocaine habit, which just struck me as odd. I mean, we all know I am not a believer in banning books. I do not think you should ban books. But his cocaine addiction is absolutely blatant in this book. And if you were going to challenge it, I don't know why they didn't add that to the list. Anyway, I enjoyed it. It's a good book. Short stories next week for Homes is Where the Heart Is. I'm not sure whether I'm going to do all of the prompts. I'm not going to read the group read because there's just such a lot going on in February. Next up, what do we have next? Sallust. A group of us, including Vin, who heads up Historiathon 2025, have been reading Sallust. Again, I've got a Delphi Classics version, which included the what words am I trying to say here, people? It included the war with Jugurtha and the war with Catiline, which was more of a conspiracy, Catiline conspiracy. And then the histories that he wrote, a 5-volume book of histories, is pretty much lost in antiquity, but a couple of things still remain, and those are a couple of speeches, a couple of letters, and then there's ones that might be Sallust but might not. And then at the back of this edition there was a brief biography, The Life and Works of Sallust by J.C. Rolfe. Sallust was around 86 to 35 BCE. His texts on the Catiline conspiracy and the war with Jugurtha, who was a Numidian king in an area that is now Algeria, really. He didn't witness these things firsthand, but he did take firsthand accounts. Excuse me. Really itchy throat. I found him to be a bit preachy, to be honest. A lot of these were about the decline of morals within the Roman Empire, and yet the biography of him at the end said he was charged but then acquitted by the Senate of extortion, but a view of that was that Caesar had paid off the Senate, and then he is believed to have bribed Caesar. So this holier than thou attitude really doesn't wash that well if what is in the biographies is actually true. Who knows? Who knows? It was all a long time ago. There were some quite interesting writings of battles in Africa with the war with Jugurtha. They were quite fun. I also read, finally finished, Irving Finkel, The First Ghosts. This was fascinating. Irving Finkel is an expert in cuneiform, and he has taken his information from cuneiform tablets found all over Mesopotamia that have been translated that deal with ghosts, the different types of ghosts, where they come from, why they're not resting, and what to do about them. And it's absolutely fascinating. These tablets are centuries apart, but you can see that there was a very widespread acceptance that ghosts were part of people's life and death. There's a whole spectrum of different ghosts, and there's a whole spectrum of exorcists. It seems to be a burgeoning career move to become an exorcist. There were lots of different types. I find Finkel writes really clearly, really accessibly, and he is an expert in his field, so you can... He's convincing. He's convincing and he's readable. And what else do you want from a history book? I really enjoyed this. It was great. Right, where have we got to? Silentfall, there. Sallust. I have finished this week the first volume of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. This volume is The Way by Swans. We're reading, a group of us are reading all 6 volumes this year. I didn't find this easy, but it wasn't hugely difficult either. Proust uses more commas than any other author I've ever read in my entire life. Sentences can be half a page long. Commas are obviously his friend. This is divided into 3 sections. The first section I enjoyed very much. The first section I enjoyed very much. It was called Combray. That being a house that belonged to his grandmother, that the family went to stay in on a very regular basis. And his descriptions of... Actually, it was the village was called, and she had a house there. The descriptions of the village, and this is his early childhood, they were just lovely, absolutely lovely, and really evocative. There was a really lovely part when he was describing the church and its steeple and what you could see. There was also another part which just resonated with me because I can remember doing the same thing. It was a long section on how he was trying to find somewhere peaceful in the garden to read where people wouldn't disturb him. I was very attached to his mother. Part 2 is called A Love of Swans. Now, Swan is a character who they meet first in Combray. He has a house just down the road. But the second section is about Swan's obsession with a woman called Odette. This section, unfortunately, it was the longest section. It was my least favourite of this book. It was just quite convoluted and strange, and yeah, I enjoyed it less. I didn't not enjoy it. I just thought it would have benefited by being half the length that it was. It ran to a couple of 100 pages, I think. Finally, the last section was called Place Names, and that was a bit rambling and was sort of halfway between... The writing style was sort of halfway between the second and the first section. The first section was really quite pastoral. Second was more about people and their relationships. In the third section, he talks firstly about different places that had a special place in his heart, whether or not he'd been to them or not. And then he befriends Swan's daughter. And becomes a little bit obsessed in the same way that Swan had become obsessed with the debt. I think I made a mistake while reading this in that I tended to read blocks of it. I'm going to move straight on to this one, which is book 2, In the Shadow of Young Girls in Flower. And I think we're reading this until the end of April. I've actually finished this one a couple of weeks early, but I think I'm going to read this one every day, 10 pages a day. And I think I'll be better able to digest it in that way. Finally, well, I say finally, it's not finally at all. I read this, The Top 500 Poems, edited by William Harmon. I am trying to learn more about poetry. Now look, you see how many lots of, don't pay any attention to the colour coding, by the way. The blue ones just mean I was reading them in the book shack because the blue ones are there. The yellow ones mean that I was in the house reading this book. The red ones occurred when I dropped the yellow ones and couldn't find them again. And then when I swept under the sofa, I found the yellow ones again, and so we're back to the yellow ones. That's the only colour coding, whether or not I have lost the ones that are immediately to hand. This book had the poetry in order of birth date of the poet. There were only, nearly 1,100 pages in this, and there were only about 100 pages of the 20th century. I was surprised by how many poets I had never heard of at all in any way, shape or form. But the one thing that struck me when I was reading this is I don't know enough about the classics, classical mythology, and I need to rectify that. But I can't do that until after I finish the Read What You Own challenge, because having a look through, well, I've only checked the physical books. I haven't checked ebooks. I don't seem to have anything that will usefully help me. This was really interesting, though, and there's lots of people that I want to look up. But first, I think what I need is a book that explains poetic forms, which I just happen to have here because I don't know what they are. So yeah, I think that probably is going to be next on my list of poetry learning. 2 other things this week. Firstly, we have started our reading of The Arabian Nights, Tales of 1001 Nights. This is volume 1. This month we are reading the prologue and nights 1 to 22. I have read so far this week nights 1 to 11. Now, I don't know if you know the premise of this book, but Shahrazad is the daughter of the vizier of a king, emperor, sultan, whatever, who keeps bringing in young girls, having sex with them, chopping their heads off in the morning. Shahrazad goes, and she is trying to stop this. And what she's doing is every night she is telling a story until the morning. But she's leaving the story with a cliffhanger, because otherwise she might lose her head. So she's banking on the assumption that said emperor wants to hear the rest of the story. This is a framed narrative, and at one point in this, you had a framed narrative within a framed narrative within a framed narrative. I was going to read One Night and Night, but I want to know what happens at the end of the story, so I just keep reading. So I stopped on at the end of night 11, and I'll probably do the rest of the nights this week. The other thing is the Ulysses 6 and others have started the reading of the Brothers Karamazov. This week we read books 1 and 2. Next week we've got books 3 and 4, so that's where I am, and that's where we're reading to for next week. They're roughly 150 pages per week we've scheduled for this. I'm loving this so far. The characters are interesting, disruptive, not the nicest people in the world, all a bit strange. The Karamazov family is feisty, but I've really enjoyed the first 2 books and I'm looking forward to the next ones. We're going to be having discussions about these, but I think it's going to be towards the end of the month when people have read a bit more. So that is my reading week. Next week, obviously, I'm going to carry on with the Brothers Karamazov. I'm going to carry on with the Arabian Nights. I am going to start early, this one, and like I say, read the Proust, minimal number of pages every day, so I can really soak it in. I've got the first 4 books of those, and there's 6 of them. So by the time I've read the first 4, there's going to be no point in not reading the last 2, and then it'll be sorted. It's also LGBTQ plus History Month in the UK this month, so I'm wanting to read a bit about that, and it's Black History Month in the US. So we'll see what we come up with. I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful reading February. I'm delighted with mine this week. I've read 82 books for the Read What You Own challenge. Page-wise, because I've read a couple of thicker ones this week, 21,161 pages, which if you divide by 250, which Olly and the rest of the Read What You Own crew have decided is your average number, then I'm up to 84.6 books. So that leaves me a bit of play to put in a couple of short ones if I want to. Anyway, I've had a really good week. I hope you have too. Let me know what you've been reading. And don't forget, next weekend is the Wasted Weekend, Garb August 3.5 Trashy Books weekend. So if you're up for that, join in. It's bound to be a load of fun. Thank you for popping by. It's always lovely to see you, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye for now.